G'day podcasters, welcome back to Season 4 of True Blue Conversations with your host, Adam Bloom. We'd like to thank Tactical Recovery for sponsoring this show. Head on over to tacticalrecovery.com.au and use the code TRUEBLUE for one hell of a discount. Tactical Recovery, magnesium-based muscle care, salty products for sore fuckers.
G'day! Welcome to True Blue Conversations. I'm Adam Bloom. Today's special guest is former Victorian police officer and AFP police officer and author of 10 Foot Tall and Not Quite Bulletproof, Cam Hardiman. And Cam has joined us today to talk about his career in the Victorian Police and also his career in the AFP and his life after service. Hi, Cam. Thanks for joining us on the show.
Hey, mate. Thanks for having me.
Mate, it's an absolute honour and a privilege to have you on the podcast. So, Cam, can you just tell us a little bit about you as a young fella? Where did you go to school? What were your hobbies? Did you play any sports? And do you have any brothers and sisters?
All right. Well, I'm a family of a mum and dad and 3 brothers, and I'm stuck in the middle. So Dad was first served in the army for 6 years as an 18-year-old, and then met Mum and joined the RAF and did 22 years. So I was a RAF brat. We'd moved to Malaya as part of his postings, and we moved around. Started in Victoria, moved to Malaya, come back to Victoria, ended up in Adelaide, back to Victoria. So I had a few different schools over the years. I think I started my schooling in Victoria, did some in Malaya, come back. So probably about 3 or 4 different primary schools over the years. And by the time I was in my 3rd year at high school, I was in my 3rd high school. So I went to 3 high schools during the 6 years. So we moved around a lot, but not as much as many at others. Dad seemed to have longer postings. And eventually when Dad decided to retire, we'd moved back to Melbourne, which was home base. And that's where I finished my schooling, and I've stayed ever since.
So, for you, were you good at school? Or
No,
were
I was terrible.
You were terrible, yeah.
No, I was terrible. I had no interest in it whatsoever. Changing schools as a young kid's quite difficult, and I swore I'd never make my kids do it, but that's difficult enough. But I never found school very interesting.
Something I can relate to.
And I found it really difficult. I just couldn't maintain interest. Or if I learnt something, I couldn't remember it. So I think I barely scraped through. I'm not sure how I progressed through the years. I never had to repeat a year, but it wouldn't have surprised me now looking back. I probably should have. And I wasn't big into sport, because I never got time to stay at a sports team long enough. I think the longest I spent in anywhere was Adelaide, which is Smithfield Plains, which is just a shocking suburb, but it was around the corner from the RAF base at Edinburgh. And I think for 6 years, we stayed there. And on the 5th year, I decided to join the local rugby team, did 12 months, and then we moved. Yeah, right. So sport wasn't huge either. Yep. Pretty hard to become part of a sports team when you keep moving. So, sorry, mate. Yeah, so school, I never enjoyed it one bit.
So did you, obviously you mentioned that your dad, he was in the Air Force, and was there an inkling for you to join the military as a young fella, or you had your heart always set on becoming a police officer?
No, there was no pressure from my parents to join the military. Dad never mentioned it. I never thought that I would, or it would be somewhere where I want to go, but I never ever thought that I'd join the police force either. I actually wanted to do art. Yeah, right. So when I left high school, I applied for these art diplomas and at uni, and because I was so bad at getting good marks at high school, I never got into any of them. So that, I think maybe if I had continued on a line of not being able to get jobs or struggling, I may have gone into the Army or the Air Force. Probably the Air Force to follow Dad, even though he'd served in the Army. But the police force come up to me as being an interest when I saw a commercial on TV, and it looked really exciting. And that that appealed to me. And my father, when he'd left the army, he'd applied for Victoria Police as well as the RAF.
Yep.
And he got accepted into both. And we're talking about the 1960s, early 60s. And he decided to take the RAF because they said they were going to send him to Malaya again.
Yeah, right. So it was a real...
So I thought, oh, my dad applied for the police force, so maybe I should do that too. And I did and got in.
And what was that like for you? Because you joined at a relatively very young age of 18, and I think for you, was there a willingness to serve, or did you just go, I'll give it a go and see what happens?
Yeah, it was more of give it a go. God, 18-year-old boys, they haven't worked it out yet, have they really?
No, not really.
And, you know, I was attracted by TV commercials, so that goes to show you the amount of thought I'd put into my career. The willingness to serve and do well at that job come later.
Yep.
So it was a bit of an eye-opener for me to go into the police academy. There was 30-odd recruits that went in the same time, actually 60 because there was 2 squads, and I was the youngest out of all of them. The oldest was 34, and I think 35 was the cut-off, so you can only take people between 18 and 35.
Yep.
You had to be a certain weight, you had to be a certain height. That was when we weren't very politically correct. I think the next oldest to me might have been 21 or 20 or something. All of them had jobs before. I didn't.
Yep.
So I was a bit of a fish out of water for a while.
And sort of lacking life experience, would you say, Cam, at that stage?
Look, I thought I had plenty of life experience.
Yep. Hindsight's a wonderful thing, isn't it?
Yeah. Now I realise I had none. But I realised that very quickly.
Yep. So what was for you, I guess, was the academy a bit of a culture shock for you, or was it, obviously you mentioned that you're with older men that had a bit of life experience. What was your time at the academy like?
Look, I enjoyed it. I really did. And the people that I went through the academy with were really good to me. I can't say I was never bullied or anything when I was young. Yeah, they made comment about being the youngest.
Yeah.
And that's fine. I made comments about the oldest bloke who was an ex-prison officer.
Yeah, right.
He was 35. To me, that was pretty old.
Yeah.
But the people I went through the academy with are great. We had some great instructors. They had a lot of experience. I looked up to these guys thinking, wow, they're here teaching us police tactics and law, and one was an ex-homicide squad detective, and it was just, for me, as an 18-year-old kid, it was an absolute eye-opener. But I think the word shock doesn't do it justice, because we had room inspections. We had to polish our boots. They even did the military thing where they dropped a coin on your bed to see if it bounced.
Yeah, right.
We had, in the morning, we had to get up, dress up in overalls. We had fatigues to do before breakfast. So I had a step that I had to sweep every morning. Then we got dressed in our uniform. Then we had breakfast. Then we got dressed in uniform. Then we had to parade down and get inspected every morning. So it was, to me, that was
just part of life now.
I was living with Mum.
Yep.
I'd gone from living with Mum and Dad to getting my room inspected and polishing my boots and getting paraded. And I remember the first parade I did, I hadn't shaved because I'd never shaved. And I got pulled off saying, you haven't shaved today, Hardiman. So I haven't shaved at all, sir. So that night they gave me permission to leave and go and buy a razor. So I come back and actually shave my face.
So what year was this, Cam? What it was?
1985.
Yeah, right. Okay. So, as you said, a bit different in the mid 1980s to what it is today.
Yeah, very different. Yeah.
Policing was very different back then. And for you, obviously you started talking about some of the fondest memories of the academy, but is there any one memory that stands out whilst you're at the academy?
No, not really. I think it's probably that far. It's all a blur now. I remember I was late that day because I got totally lost.
Yeah.
Had no idea. I was driving my brother's old car that, had a wind up. You could lift when the battery was flat, you could lift the number plate, put a crank in and turn it over.
Geez.
I crank it. That's how old this car was, 1950 something. I had my first suit on that I bought from a local shopping centre. This terrible looking tie, and I felt uncomfortable the second I walked in.
Yep.
I remember getting my uniform and thinking, what have I done? I wasn't that good at school, and now I'm doing law lectures and law exams.
Was that a thing for you that did it click? When you finally found, obviously you started your police, did it start to click academically, or did that come later?
I didn't find any of the academic stuff hard.
Yeah, right, okay.
No, even the law and understanding the law and dissecting it, I didn't find that difficult at all. I don't know why, because, I think, from memory, I failed English at high school. It was terrible. Never read any of the books. Had no interest. Mathematics was terrible.
Yep.
All the subjects I did I wasn't a good at, apart from art.
Yep.
Hence why I wanted to do art. So I don't know why it wasn't that hard for me to understand law. And again, the practical exercises about making arrests and stuff like that, I enjoyed those.
Yep.
So I can't say that I think it was 4.5 months at the academy was a bad experience. It was probably a highlight of the career.
Yep.
I enjoyed it.
So what was it like the day that you had you finally graduated, and did they have the hat parade where you throw your hats in the air?
Yeah, throw our hats up. Yep, we all got to throw our hats up. That was sort of, you had to do that.
And what was that like for you? Was that a proud moment of you'd stuck it out for 4 months, you'd worked hard,
yeah.
and
Definitely. And every single one of us was proud of it.
Yeah.
Because it was a hard slog.
Yeah.
We had to put in. We had to live there.
Because are you guys paid? Because I know in New South Wales they're not paid.
We were paid from the second we got in.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So, and I know New South Wales is still the only academy where you go for 9 months and you're not paid.
I can't believe that.
Yeah.
Weird.
Yeah, it's so strange. I don't know why, but it's a huge sacrifice, and
it will save the police force a lot of money.
Yeah, yeah.
No, we were paid. I don't think the money was exceptional, but we were paid and we were fed. A certain amount of the pay went towards our food. But to me, I'd never had a job. That was a lot of money. I bought my first car for the money I made in the academy.
Yeah. I couldn't
have bought it otherwise.
So could you go on the weekends? Were you allowed to leave and go home and see family?
Or leave. So I used to share a ride with a couple of guys, and I lived at least 40, 50 minutes from the academy. So we used to drop each other off on the way. Yep. Pick each other up on the Sunday night and
be ready for Monday
get to
morning.
Room, iron our shirts for the week or a couple of days. And ready for classes the next day. Well, ready to go up and sweep my step. Sweep that step.
So, where was your first posting? What station did you start at when you left the academy?
Avondale Heights was my first station. It was a quiet, what I would call a Sleepy Hollow. It was a station that was on a main road that was only one way into this suburb and one way out. It was bordered by two main creek lines, one being the Maribyrnong, I think, and the one being the Merry Creek or something like that. So there was one way in, one main road right down through the centre called Military and Milliara Road. And to the north was Broadmeadows, which was busy. To the east was Moonee Ponds. We had Sunshine and St Albans over at the west, and then part of Sunshine down to the south. So there were all these busy stations around it, but this was what I call Sleepy Hollow, so it was quiet. We still got the good jobs, but we weren't run ragged like some of these other stations. Good place to learn.
I know one of the stations you mentioned, or one of the suburbs you mentioned, Sunshine. Police earned their keep there, didn't they?
They earned their money there.
Yeah, and a few other Broadmeadows and
Moonee Ponds, St Albans, all earned their money, and we spent most of our time actually over the border helping them out.
Yeah, right.
So we had Avondale Heights had Melbourne Airport.
Yep.
And which just on one side of that freeway is Broadmeadows area. So we used to always be up at Broadmeadows helping, or head south down to High Point West Shopping Centre, which was Sunshine's area. So we spent a lot of time helping other people out rather than their own area.
Are those areas, Cam? Are they back in the late 80s, early 90s? Were they of a lower economical sort of income people, or what? Why was it so? Why were they so like the rough areas in Melbourne at that time?
Oh, definitely low socio-economic. You look at Broadmeadows, places in Broadmeadows, a lot of factory areas in Broadmeadows, so therefore a lot of factory workers, lower paid, and that's where you get your problems from.
Yep.
St Albans and Sunshine, ethnic areas, a lot of infighting between them. I remember St Albans because I eventually transferred there. You had these fights between the Serbs and the Croatians. The young kids hated each other because they were Serbian or Croatian, and they were fighting because of something their grandfathers did.
Yep.
So a lot of violence, and there was a lot of alcohol there, a lot of family violence. And Sunshine was the same. Whereas Avondale Heights, a lot of older retired people living around there.
So what was it like for you? Obviously, been to the academy, 18. Now you're out on the beat, as they say. What was some of the stories that you've been told at the academy, and now you're out living them? What was that like as a young 18-year-old? And looking back now.
Oh, look, I thought it was in a bit. They gave me a uniform. I remember I was on a probationary licence, so I had to have P plates on my car.
Yeah, right.
So I drove from home to the police station with P plates on my car, pulled my car out the back and parked it, and then I'd jump in a police car and drive around as I wished. I'm not sure if you ever look at the book, you can see a photo of me when I graduated.
I've seen, yep.
I looked younger than 18.
Yep.
And you can imagine that kid walking in with a police uniform and a gun to a domestic situation, telling adults how to handle their married life and how to be better and not argue, and I've just started to shave. It was hard.
Yep.
It was hard. But I look back at those times with fond memories.
So from a and I'm imagining it now, being 18 back, a few years ago for myself, and I know what you're talking about. What was it like with your colleagues, with your older colleagues? Did they accept you and respect you in the sense of
Straight
being
away.
so young? Yeah.
I'm still friends to this day with people that I work with, which is nearly 30, 40 years ago.
Yep.
Still friends with some of those people these days.
So, midway through your general duties, you got seconded to plainclothes. What was that like?
Again, I was only probably 19, 20 back then, I think. It was great. I was allowed to grow my hair long again. I could wear a pair of jeans instead of suit pants and a tie. It was, again, an eye-opener. I was working with some very, very experienced coppers who, they never had a go at me or worried about my age either.
Yep.
In fact, it probably suited the work because no one ever thought this kid in the t-shirt with the long hair was going to be a policeman. I looked 17 or 18. Boy, if I worked in a pub in plain clothes, they'd probably ask me for some ID.
Yeah, right.
So I think it probably suited me. In fact, I'll tell a story when we did a drug warrant and we're inside the house and these people were dealing drugs and there was a knock on the door while we were inside with the warrant and someone had come to the front door to order stuff. So I answered the door and he didn't think twice about it. He just started to blab what he wanted his order to be. So I invited him inside to the kitchen and said, so what would you like to buy from us? And we ended up sitting him down and the two big burly policemen that I was working with come in and he thought, oh shit, I've been caught. So looking 17-year-old or as young as I was sort of worked to my advantage a bit.
So how long were you in plainclothes before you decided to follow a lifelong dream? And we'll get to that dream in a minute. How long have you been in plainclothes for?
Well, I did that for just over 12 months because I had to go back to Avondale Heights and I ended up transferring to St Albans, which was obviously a lot busier.
Yep.
And I did that for one reason. Everyone sort of expected after 4 or 5 years in the job that you'd start to work towards becoming a detective. Not necessarily what I wanted to do. but I worked towards it anyway, and going to St Albans and getting busier station was an advantage. Because back then, to become a detective, you had to present a portfolio of your work, how many arrests you'd had, what sort of offences, how many interviews you've done, how many times you've been to court, even parking tickets, to make sure that you'd got a cross-section of police work before they put you through detective training school. So I've done all that. And at St Albans, I built up that portfolio to the point where I couldn't say I was definitely going to be accepted as a detective, but I had a fairly good portfolio to apply and give it a good crack. And with the other police experience of the plainclothes unit added to that. But that never eventuated because other jobs come up that sort of piqued my interest, and that was it for me.
Yeah, well, we'll get to that now. Where and the story behind that of you always loved, and you talk about it in your book of your love of helicopters, and you remember the RAF. Is it the RAF pilot that waved at you?
I'm pretty sure it was RAF back then. I think the RAF would have been the 70s. The RAF I think still had the helicopters in. You know, as a RAF brat, and any RAF brat will know this, that back then in the 70s and 80s, when the RAF put on an air display, which they had every year, they did the best air display. Money never seemed to be an object. You know, they had the F-111, they had the afterburners go off. They used to get a Neptune bomber come in and bomb this cardboard cutout, and all the explosives and fireworks go off. And they'd have a Chinook fly in and do pirouettes and amazing flying. Then a guy in an Iroquois come in and they'd winch down and winch back up. And as a kid, I thought, I look forward to that. I don't have them anymore, unfortunately. And there was one occasion when I always loved the helicopter, the Chinook and the Iroquois. Amazing, especially the sound of that Iroquois.
Yeah.
It's undeniably, I know, it does something to me. It must be the thump, the heartbeat. I remember playing at the yard with my brother, and I could hear it coming from miles away because you can. It's that thump, 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 thump.
Yep.
And I could see it come over the horizon, and it come really close to the house over the top and sort of turned to the right a bit as if it was changing track to head where it's going. And I remember seeing the side door, which the Iroquois had this big double window side door which slides all the way back on the body.
Yep.
And opens the side open. And there was this guy in green gear sitting in that side seat facing out as they're turning. I thought it was going to fall out. And I wave, of course, and this guy waves back. And I thought, I looked around thinking, he's waving at me. Well, I think so. It could have been waving at his girlfriend at the other house. I don't know. And I thought, that is a cool job. Didn't think about the pilot job at all, but I thought, look where he's sitting and look at the bird's eye view. He's flying around in that thing, having the ball. But it never occurred to me that maybe to do that I had to join the Air Force or go into the Navy. That was never an option, so I never thought about that, but forgotten about it. But always had this love of that particular helicopter.
It's amazing, isn't it, that you, like, with your dad being in the RAF, that you hadn't thought, oh, yep, that's the path I've got to go down.
I never considered it.
And then it came in an unusual way of being in the police, where you like, it's so strange that you're at and like you said in your book, you're at a bit of a crossroads in your career of, well, I don't really want to be a detective, but the progression is sort of where I've got to go. Yeah. But you then, in 1992, you left plainclothes and you transferred to the air wing as an air observer. Yeah. And if you can share with us what the process was, and it was a really rigorous process, wasn't it? And there was no guarantee that you were actually going to get the job. No,
I mean, I remember when it came up, and I sort of knew that Victoria Police had an air wing, and it wasn't that old. They only had it in 1985. It had only been around for 6 years.
Yeah, right.
So it wasn't as if the unit had been around for a long time. The funny thing was, they based in Essendon Airport, and Essendon Airport was part of my area in Avondale Heights, but I never knew they were there. I'd heard them come to 2 or 3 jobs in my whole career. They come over at night time to spotlight some offenders to camp from a car or a burglary. So I sort of knew about them, but they were that close. I could have gone to visit them, but never thought about it.
Yeah.
Until I saw their job come advertised, and they were advertising for air observers, and I thought, wow, I could do that job that guy that waved to me all those years ago. I thought, how good's that? That's way better than being a detective. So I spoke to a few blokes, and I eventually got the courage to go out there and knock on the door. A sergeant of mine convinced me to go. He said, "You idiot, they're down the road at Essendon. Go and knock on the door and say hello." So I did. And after a tour and a fly around the helicopter, I thought, this is my job. I want this. So I put in, but it took a fair time to get there. I mean, I didn't just apply once. Every application back then, there would have been 80, 90 applicants, and they only take one or two. The rumour the saying used to be that you had to wait for someone to be carried out in a box before you got a job there, and that was pretty much spot on. The only reason a job came available at the area is because someone retired. No one ever sort of transferred out there to go somewhere else. You had to wait until they died or retired. The selection process back then, I wouldn't call it highly rigorous. I didn't seem to have any problem with most of it. It was an interview. You had to interview in front of a chief pilot, the chief air observer, and the operations manager. That was about police procedures, and the what if questions. What would you do if you're presented with this? And they were never aimed at anything to do with helicopters, because they didn't expect any copper to know much about it. There were a few, I mentioned in the book, a few questions about, I did not realise at this time, but they used to navigate around the streets of Melbourne using a Melway. And Melway's a street directory that you have in your car, where all the police cars use. So they used to ask you really questions to test your knowledge on the Melway. And the air observer's knowledge on the Melway is far better than the knowledge of a street copper.
I was going to say, it's a bit different to...
So you fluff all those questions and think, I've failed them, and you walk out thinking you haven't done any good. There was also physical, which involved simulated physical, so you lifted weights to simulate a stretcher because they had to do air ambulance work as well. There was stuff in the water about pulling people in and out of water, swimming, treading water, swimming underwater at distances. All these exercises translated to something to do with the helicopter. One of the ones that took me a while to work out, I had to ask the question, but we had to hold our breath while we're in the water and swim underwater without coming to the surface for 25 metres. And that was if the helicopter ditched and we had to swim away from either a fire, oil or debris. So all these exercises, diving down and picking up a brick, was that you'd be able to dive down and go back in if you needed to pull something out. So all those sort of water exercises, and then running and normal sort of fitness tests. And then if you were lucky enough, you got to be the one of 90 people that got the job.
There's one story that I read in your book, and I just want to go back for a second. That it's just come into my mind of you were on duty the day that Russell Street, the bombing happened.
Yep.
What do you remember of that day, and is it like a blur or?
Well, I remember at the time when the bomb, there was actually two explosions. One was the initial one, and then there were a couple of explosions afterwards, which is the tyres going off.
Yep.
I remember when I felt the ground when the first one went off, because I was about 2 blocks away at a cinema in Elizabeth Street. It's no longer a cinema. I was actually in the toilet, pretty embarrassing at the time. And I finished my business as quick as possible. I heard everything come up the radio about something's happened at Russell Street, which to me was only 2 blocks to the north. So I got out of there, ran out the front and started running up the street. I can't remember if I was working with anyone at the time.
No, I don't think you were.
Because I was city traffic at the time, so
Yeah.
we used to get time to wander, or if we weren't, what we call working point, directing traffic with the old white gloves on.
the white gloves, yeah.
And I remember running up there and stopping just at the intersection where Russell Street building is on the corner. So it's at the intersection, I can't remember the streets, but it's Russell Street and whatever. So the courthouse, Melbourne Courthouse, which copped a lot of shrapnel, was on one corner, and the opposite corner was Russell Street. I got that far, you could see the smoke, and one of the tyres was still going off and exploding, and that's about it. That's what I remember of that. And I know I worked a fair amount of hours. I can't remember what time of day. It was about lunchtime.
Yep.
I remember still searching, doing line searches, and finding a piece of engine block and a half away from the explosion, and that was just getting on dark. So I don't know, whether it was 14 or 15 hours. I remember doing that. Our office for city traffic at the time was the other end of the city. I can't remember going back to that office and getting changed, but I would have had to. And then I remember being on the tram and I fainted. I fainted on the tram. I hadn't had lunch or dinner, and I fainted and fallen down the
Just
stairwell.
physically exhausted.
I was physically exhausted. I was standing because there was no room.
Yep.
It's weird. Everyone got up to give me a seat. I'm usually giving up to give them a seat. And that's about it. I still don't remember what happened between me getting actually to the scene and me searching. I think it must have been at least 8 hours later. So that's a blur.
So, I've read up on Russell Street and I've watched I obviously wasn't born then. That was 1986, was it? 86?
86 or 87, yeah.
Yeah, and it was...
Yeah, I think because I transferred to Russell Street a month later.
Yeah, right. And I think, too, what I gather from... It was so lucky that there was only one death. Tragically, there was one death, Angela Taylor, and another police officer was injured.
Donadio,
yeah. And
he was injured.
so they're very lucky that a lot of other people weren't killed that day. And I think I remember that they said the bomb didn't go off properly, or if it went off properly, it would have caused a lot more damage.
I think Angela Taylor was going to get the lunch for the
yeah,
station.
she was, and it was they did did a coin toss, and she lost the coin toss. And
that's what happened. Someone would leave the station, get lunch for everyone else. But considering the amount of officers that were there, like D24 was there.
Yep.
There was the normal police station there. There was all these files and warrants, and it was basically headquarters. So if you think about lunchtime,
it should have been packed that day.
Should have been packed. Not to mention the court was across the road and in session. So therefore, it should have been way more than that.
Yeah. Yeah, so very, very lucky that tragic as well. And yeah, it's such a shame that Angela, because I read up her story and she was a very promising. She would have had a very promising career, and and I'm glad they got the guys that did that, and rest. I hope you're rotting away like you should be.
I think one of them wants to get out soon. One of the Minogue brothers.
Yes, I've read that. Yeah, that he's apparently he's a changed man. So
they all are, aren't they?
Yeah, that's it. They go in and I'm changed, and parole comes up. So, but and you also I'm going through your career, and there's. In the early, so the Wall Street shootings that happened as well. You weren't involved, but that was.
No, but I remember the night I was working on that night.
Yep.
I got a bomb threat that night. Believe it or not. At the time that shooting happened, I was sitting at Avondale Heights Police Station. I was by myself, which is a bit weird at night when you're a young kid. And the divisional van, the crew were out, and someone rang and said, I'm going to blow the station up or whatever. And I thought, they hung up, and I thought, oh shit, what do I do now? And the typical thing is you call the police. Well, we are the police. So I called the van back. And I can't remember the time, but we thought we'd better stand outside just in case it does. So we could park the div van out the front, and the three of us are standing there waiting for the clock to tick to see if the station goes up. But that was basically the time that Wall Street had gone off.
Yeah.
And I don't know how we found out, but I remember listening to it on the radio going, whoa.
Yeah.
That was just unheard of.
Well, hadn't been...
That changed policing forever.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it hadn't... Well, I think the turn of the century when Ned Kelly at Stringy Bark Creek, that was the previous to that. That was the, that police were targeted in that in that terrible
assassinated. So
yeah.
that was a sad time for a lot of coppers. I think everyone felt that, and it wasn't long after that ballistic vests come in.
Because the boys, so Steve Tynan and Damien Eyre, they were only a couple of years older than you at that stage?
Damien Eyre was in training. Steve Tynan had been out for a little while, I think, so he would have been a couple of years ahead of us.
Yep.
I know Angela Taylor was a squad or two ahead of us.
Yep.
She was doing her duties 1 month in Russell Street, and we did the following month.
Yeah, right.
So, Steve Tynan was around for a little while.
Yeah.
He was the most experienced guy on the crew, and Damien Eyre was the younger guy.
Yeah,
so.
I think most experienced. And you're saying that, and he was 20. I think he was 22 at the time. Yeah. 22, and Damien was 20, I think, and his father and brother were police officers as well. Yep. So, yeah, that would have been a tough time. And
so you got a divisional van working the streets in the middle of the night by a 22-year-old and a 20-year-old. But that was policing.
And I think the sad thing too, Cam, that when I've watched that documentary is those two. It wasn't even their area. They were. Yeah,
because they were from Paran.
Yeah, Paran. Yeah. And they were called down to Walsh Street, and it was just a sad time. And I think, like you said, it changed policing.
It changed policing. It had a huge effect on a lot of coppers, especially the uniformed coppers. That thought, because you're patrolling in the middle of the night and you're going to jobs, you suddenly that every job or every car now become a potential hazard or assassination. And these guys, all they'd gone to was a suspect vehicle that was in the street. And we did that day in, day out.
Yeah.
Every night you would go, someone called, there's a car on the street, we don't know where it's from. Suspect vehicle. Or you're pulling over a car and you start thinking about what happened to those guys.
Yeah.
So it changed policing, it changed the process of the way we thought and what could happen.
And I think a few years down the track, and there's another 10 years later, unfortunately, it happened again to a couple of other uniformed police.
Gary Silk.
Gary Silk. And
Gary Silk was one of the guys that started the academy at the same time I did.
Yeah, right.
And Gary Silk was, I think he was born to be a copper. As a young 18-year-old, I had no idea about anything. He wasn't that much older than me.
Yep.
But he was in our sister squad. I remember thinking, he's made to be a copper. This guy does really well at the law and really well at everything.
Yep.
He's really putting in. He's going to go places. And he got promoted to sergeant well before any of us.
Yeah.
Look what happened to him.
Yeah.
And again, he just pulled over a car.
Yeah, Rod Miller as well.
Rod Miller was the junior guy there, and they pulled over a car, and look what happened.
Yeah, I know. And it just highlights, how dangerous.
I was working that night too.
Yeah, right. And just goes to show how policing is so and the ordinary civilian doesn't see they don't see what goes on of a night, and it's and even in the daytime too. It's not just nighttime, but it's daytime as well.
Yeah, well, it doesn't have to be nighttime. And the thing is that all that sort of those jobs affect every copper, and they change. That's the stuff they think about. So a lot of members of the public don't realise that while they're patrolling around the street, that's the stuff that they've got to process. That the next car they pull up. So when they pull up a car, there's a whole bunch of things they're doing to make sure that the risk is they're going to get shot. Looking in the back of the car, they're parking sort of out so they've got some space so they don't get hit.
Yeah.
One's watching a passenger, one's watching the driver, and could this be the one that's going to be the one that pulls a gun or a knife or just gets out and smacks me in the chops? Yeah. A lot of people don't realise that that's every single car they pull over, they're going through that same process. Yeah. The same as when they go to a domestic. I'm going to domestic, is it going to be violent? Are they going to turn on me? Yeah. Stuff like, I don't want them to walk into the kitchen because there's knives in there. Yeah. I need to separate them so they won't fight. I need, who's going to take the big burly man that wants to kill his wife, and who's going to take the wife that's been beaten? This process is this is the battle they do, and they do it every single day.
Yep.
And they start this process the second they start work. It's not like that they've got to build up to it.
Yeah.
It's not like a fire when you get to go lights and sirens and think about the fire.
Yeah.
This is the thing you do, just your normal, everyday duty. Kid walking down the street with his hands in his pockets, and you think he's got his hood on, you're looking for someone breaking the houses, you go and stop him.
Yeah.
Is he going to pull something on you? So you got this heightened level of response 24/7.
And I think too, it's a great example that you talk about is that, you know, I'm a first responder as well, and it's the process. You're right. You go through the process. It's the. I always say it that there's fear. I always have fear every time I go out in the truck because I'm always thinking the what ifs. What if this? Have I done this? Have I, you know? And I'm trying to get from the radio messages that are coming through. I'm trying to build a picture and an image in my head of what I'm going to face when I get there. And that's the thing. You're always thinking, and it's like you as well. You sort of when you become a leader as well, you sort of think of your safety last, and you think of it's all about your crew and your colleagues as well. It's all about them, and you sort of go to the you're sort of one of the my safety is the last thing. It's as long as I get them home to their family, that's the first thought that I always have, and then it's mine's the second thought, and I've had conversations with veterans and other first responders as well, and they've always said, yeah, but it should be you. It should be your first. And mine's I think of my crew first.
Yeah, but at least you're thinking, at least you're processing the job. But if you weren't processing the job and going through those what ifs, then I'd be worried.
Yes. Yeah.
And if there wasn't a little bit of fear there, I'd also be worried.
Yeah.
I mean, fear's good for us.
Absolutely.
It keeps us on our toes.
Yep.
Things happen to our body that we need. Adrenaline.
Yep.
One thing.
Yep.
The heart rate goes up. Blood and oxygen goes to the extremities and stuff like that. Brain works a bit better. Decisions are quicker.
Yeah.
It's like this fight or flight. So fear is a good thing.
Yeah.
As long as it's not one that is going to incapacitate you.
Yeah.
And make you not be able to operate. But I think a little bit is good.
It's healthy.
It's healthy.
Yeah.
It's a normal response.
So we'll go back to you now part of you now. We got a little bit sidetracked, but that's okay.
Right.
That's I love this podcast. You can go anywhere and you can pull it. And so you now part as an air observer. You start your training.
Yep.
What was the role? Obviously, you mentioned some winching and all air rescues and things like that. What was in the early days? What was the training like, and what did you? Obviously, from when you started to when you left, things had changed a lot from when you first started as an air observer. And yeah. So, what was training like for you?
The initial training took about 2 years. It was there are some classroom stuff and theory, and there's a lot of on the job practical stuff. The very first course you did was a winch crewman course, what we call winch crewman. The police helicopter back then was a C model Dauphine built, French, built in about 79, I think it was, the original one. Actually, all three of them were 79, except we bought the first one brand new in 79 or 80, and then we bought in 85. We bought two more second-hand ones. There's a story about those second-hand ones. We might get into later, but and the crew, everyone in the crew had a job. Obviously, a pilot flies the helicopter. The police air observer sits in the front of the cockpit with him, and is basically in control of the police operation, whereas the pilot's in charge of the flying. And there's a third person in the crew, whether it be a crewman or another air observer. And their job was to be the down-the-wire man in a winch rescue. If they can't do that, you're a passenger. So the very first thing you had to do is a 2-week course on how to do that. So that's the first step. And then you become part of the crew. Otherwise, if you went on a fly, you're the fourth person, sitting in the back and the first bloke to get kicked off if there was a big job. That course went for 2 weeks, and then most of the training after that, apart from all the subsidiary stuff like Hewitt helicopter underwater scope training was done, winch operator to learn how to operate the winch, that was another 2 weeks. Air ambulance, you had to do a course in air ambulance work to help the paramedic out. All your map reading and operations. Fast rapid dispatcher for the SOG. Conning of aircraft from the ground if you need to do sling loading. Then amongst all that was all your navigation skills. So the navigation skills had to range from everything from reading the Melways to find streets in the middle of the night around Melbourne, just to do normal police work, to aviation maps going from airport to airport to help the pilot out in bad weather, or running searches, so doing searches of other topographical maps. So there's a whole range of navigation skills.
So converting like grid reference to lat longs and all that stuff,
lot. And mud map sort of stuff. So when you don't, like if you look at a Melways street directory, there's no lat and longs. It's streets. And your job might be to fly from somewhere in Williamstown to a house in Doncaster, and for say a robbery, someone had broken in, that people are still there. So that might have covered 3 or 4 Melways maps. Now you're crossing a Melways map every 30 seconds in a helicopter, so you've got to be ahead of the ball, plan ahead and know exactly which way you're going using a map that's made for someone sitting in the car.
Makes it very hard.
It was very hard. And the way they did it, we had to train one step at a time and get assessed, and we had to do it during the day first before we could do it at night, because if you can understand, to navigate using such a map, I mean, if you had a navigation map and you wanted to go from Essendon to, say, Bendigo, you can draw a line on a navigation map, get your compass out, and get a direction.
Punch a bearing to that,
And then but if you want to go from Williamstown to Doncaster using a Melways map, it's more like I'll point that way, and that's the way we're going to go. That's it.
Yeah, right.
But you had to use all these identifying features on the ground. So one might be the city. I've got to be right of the city. So first track's right of the city. I've got to come over this part of the freeway. I've got to see these ovals on the map. I know I'm going to pass them. Doncaster Shopping Town is on the hill. That's the Westfield. It's got a big Westfield sign. Can't see it during the day. You can see it at night. All that sort of stuff.
Crazy stuff.
And as you get closer, refine those down to, there's that tennis court's on the map. It's past the tennis court. It's near this roundabout. There's the house there. And all that happens in 200 kilometres an hour. Flat out.
Yeah, right.
But eventually what happens is you do it so often, it clicks, and then suddenly you work out your way of doing it. And that I reckon that took probably the majority of that 2-year training was to develop that skill.
So you mentioned, and in the book, it's actually I read this, and because I can relate to what you're talking about, because I winch into remote fires and work on them and down the wire, and I know exactly what you're talking about, where you talk about you just done your winch training and you forgot to come off comms, and can you tell us a little bit about that story?
Well, I mean, there was mistakes. We all
make them. We're human.
You don't really want to make the mistakes when you think you're so professional. But forgetting comms as you're going out the door, and they start to winch you out the door, and you go, "Oh, my helmet's holding me in." And the winch operator, they know that the most common mistake that a winch crewman's going to do is not to go off comms. So the winch operator, they know that. And the good thing is that all of the winch operators have been winch crewmen.
Yes.
And I've forgotten lots of stuff on the winch. I've made my mistakes on the winch. Lucky they're non-life threatening, but going off comms is a common one.
Coming off the wander lead is another one.
Look, I remember one day I was doing some fast rate dispatching. It was training. I remember like this was yesterday. Some things you do just put the fear of God in you. And at the time we didn't have, the wheels had spats on it, like these covers. And at the time we were doing such heavy landings that they were falling off all the time, and our engineers were sick of it and putting them on, so they just left them in the cupboard. So instead of having these covers on the wheel, we had these bare wheels. And I remember coming over to dispatch the sod. We throw the rope out at the right timing, and one by one you send them down the rope. And then once they're on the ground, operationally you'd punch the rope off and drop it. But because we're operational, we want to use it again, we'd pull the rope in. Weights bloody ton. I couldn't pull the rope in properly because what happened is that it hit the ground and with that load, curled back up. It was around the wheel. So I thought, I told the pilot to put the brakes on, right? So just flick, which is a little switch. And I got out of the helicopter out the door at about 40 feet, and I'm standing on the wheel, holding on to this a single hand thing. And with the other foot, I'm trying to lift the rope off with my other foot, and I managed to just get it off and fall. I jump back out in the helicopter and I start leaning out, pulling in this rope. And I get the rope off, and we land, and then I get off the helicopter and walk straight away and go, shit, I wasn't connected. So I'd been doing all this standing on the wheel at 40 feet with nothing holding me to the aircraft. And that's the last time I ever did it.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's... Because it's, you know yourself how dangerous it is. Like, it's so dangerous up there, and if, as we've always been briefed, if you're not in the strop, you're on the wander lead, or you're in the helicopter and you're done up. Yep. You're not.
So I had a wander lead on.
Yep.
But it wasn't connected or anything.
Jeez. Yeah.
And you know that happens because you're in and out all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I would have assumed at that time that I was connected, so therefore I didn't bother checking. I just got out. Whereas ever since that day, if I was ever going to get out, I'd just make sure it's on.
Yeah. Yeah, it's one of those moments.
It took that to change my mentality and my way of thinking, to check that every single time.
It's funny, isn't it, that sometimes when you look, and like you said, it's one of those moments where you just go, yep, I've learnt my lesson of...
And call yourself an idiot.
But I can understand, because and for someone who has been up in helicopters, and I understand it, I get exactly what you're talking about. It's easy done.
Easy done.
You just, oh, yep, I've got that to... And because you got to think, I've got to get that out. I've got to get that rope out of, and...
Yeah, but you're not like kneeling. I remember sort of standing up with my back wedged up against the door with my head hanging out.
Yeah, right.
Straight up. And then standing at the wheel going.
And there's a moment you mention in the book as well where you're... it struck me because I went, oh, it's my one fear on the winch. When you're going down, you're putting so much faith in that cable, and you were training, and you were in Port Phillip Bay,
yep.
And you started to feel the tunk 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 of the snapping of the of the cable. Can you tell us through that, and what were your thoughts?
The cable's not. I think the cable's about 6 mil in diameter. It's not,
yeah.
But it's got an inner core, so there's an inner winding and an outer winding. And it actually stretches too.
Yep.
So a lot of operators, and we did too, they actually would pre-stretch it.
Yep.
And sometimes you can get a bounce to it, just a real slight bounce, and you can feel it twing. There's sort of like this sound it makes sometimes, as the bands might sort of mesh a bit better. And I think it was about 80 feet over the bay, and we're going towards a boat, so they're going to put me in the back of the boat. And the scenario is they usually, as a winch crewman, they get you, or down the wireman, they get you out early and just below the aircraft, or to the point where you can hold the wheel or something to keep yourself steady, but you're out. So all those procedures from the back corner of the helicopter to the front door, do your checks, go out, and you'd sit there and wait until they got the right approach to the boat and start winching you down. And the timing should be that you would gradually get lowered to the boat as you pull up.
Yep.
There'd be minimal time over the boat because there's a downwash about to come behind you.
Yep.
So you want the person in the boat before the downwash hits the boat and pushes it away.
Yeah.
That's what it was in theory. So they had started, I was below the step and they had started to winch me down, so they're starting to reduce speed.
Yep.
And any minute they were going to reduce height. And I could feel the stretch and the little twinging, but there was these little... I can't even describe the sound, but it was like a ping that vibrated right through the wire, and I thought that's not right. And you know, as when you're on the wire, if there's a sound to be heard, you will hear it. Hear it.
100%.
Even though, and like I always said, it's a really lonely place on that wire.
Yeah.
It's really quiet. Even though you got wind.
Yep.
And engine noise and rotor
and
noise, it's such a quiet place because your brain can't hear that.
Yep.
It's too busy thinking, "Fuck, I hope this wire holds," or "I hope they're seeing these obstacles," or "I hope this winch operator is going to look after me." And the twang of this pinging went about 3 or 4 times.
Yep.
And I looked up, and there's mayhem. There's a winch operator, a winch instructor. They're almost arguing, and then I felt the helicopter descend really quick, like almost engine failure.
Yeah, right.
And what happens in engine failure, it uses height and it tries to grab some height, some speed, and then forward plane and then fly off.
Yep.
And I thought, this ain't good. So when I got close to the water, we had a quick release. And we obviously didn't have a failure because it went really close to the water and stopped. I thought, I'm getting out of here anyway. So there was a cape well quick release, like parachutists wear on each shoulder that goes a harness. So you pop this metal cover, it springs open, a little ring pulls out, flips out, and you pull it, and it separates. And I went into the water. And later on, they'd told me that the boat had to pick me up, and I had to get picked up by another helicopter to take him back to Essendon. And they'd said that the cable had shredded. So I went and saw the winch. And the winch was an old style winch, you know, now they're covered over. It was an old style winch, everything was open and the coil was just, it looked like a cat had got hold of a ball of twine and totally destroyed it. I'm thinking, this ain't supposed to happen.
Yep.
And it never has happened.
Yeah, right.
What happened was it started to, there was a guide that would guide the wire on and off the roller.
Yep.
And it usually follows a direction up and down, so it lays the cable on properly. And it decided to go the other way because it had a little nick in it.
Yep. And
it started shredding the cable, and the pings I was hearing was the wire, outside wires snap.
Yeah,
and there was nothing left but the inside wires.
Yep.
It's about 5 or 6 strands. And I thought I'd dodged a bullet that day.
Yeah, I was going to say, and it was lucky you're over water because we're told very much the same.
Exactly what happens.
I know exactly. I know what.
If it's over land, they're going to punch you off, and you better hope that you get a soft landing or a tree to hold on.
Or a tree as they said to us that try and do a koala hug to a tree if there is
one.
Yeah.
Or wait till you're closest to the ground and punch off, and hopefully you survive it.
And that's where they and I understand why they sacrifice one.
For the greater good.
For the greater good. Yeah, for the greater good.
A couple of $1 million worth of helicopter and true crew are far more important than that winch crewman.
That's right. Yeah.
And that's also in the back of your mind too.
Yeah.
You know, if something goes wrong, it doesn't have to be a shredding of the cable.
Yep.
They can punch you off. If they say the 3 words cut, in that cabin, and I always laugh about this, but the winch operator's got a cable cutter. He hits a button.
Yep.
And the pilot's also got to hit the button. But they don't have to both hit the button for it to go off. An explosion goes off into his canister and forces a chisel through the cable and punches you loose.
Yep.
And I always said that cut, and both of them do it so they don't have any blame.
Yep.
Not one person can blame the other for killing the full crewman.
Yeah. It's
a lot of people don't realise that. Yeah.
No, and that's when we're told as well when we go into fires that winching is a last resort. It is if they can land, if they can hover exit, hover entry, winching is the last resort because it is the most dangerous and it takes, it takes a long, and it's the most vulnerable when a chopper is in its hover.
Right.
It is the most vulnerable point when it's hovering and you're sitting there and it's taking time to get all your stuff out. Winching is the last resort that they want to, if they can land, they'll land. If it's hover exit, that's what it is. And and you are like, exactly what you said. When you're on that winch, you're going, shit. I hope this doesn't run out, or I'm hoping that it doesn't run in all the way. Or
it's an awful feeling.
It is.
It's something I never get used to.
No,
and I always used to enjoy the ride up.
Yeah.
Because the longer it went, the closer you were to being back in the helicopter. Whereas the opposite was the longer it went.
Yeah, the longer you
the
go
further
down,
you got away, and the more at risk you were. So I used to enjoy the ride up.
Yeah, and
much better.
I find too, Cam, the biggest thing that when you got the spin, when you that spin, and you're trying to hit the skids, and you're like, oh geez, this is, and it's definitely. But the biggest thing that I found when I started to do my hit training was, once that helicopter's just off the ground, you can push that, you can walk the helicopter. They are so, once they're off the ground, you can just virtually push it to where you want it to. And it's in its little bubble, and some of those pilots, mate, are just unbelievable in what they can do.
Well, see, I used to say that most pilots can winch, because every pilot has to learn how to hover to land and take off.
Yep.
So it ain't that hard. That's what I used to say. They used to say, oh, you've got no idea what it's like to winch. I said, don't you have to hover the helicopter to take off and land? Yeah, well, how hard is it?
Very true, very true. So what are some of your more memorable moments in your time when you were an air observer, and you mentioned in the book there's a few, and I'm going to let you talk about, we've spoken about them when we went for dinner before,
okay.
And what are some of your more memorable moments?
Oh God, I can say that there's nothing more dangerous than a bunch of air observers with nothing to do. And some of the highlights have been there with some of the practical jokes we used to play on each other. And the camaraderie between crews, we really did get on.
Yeah.
But I suppose some of the ambulance jobs I got involved with, although they were critical jobs, I really enjoyed them. I was around for the collapse of the Arthur Seat chairlift when that collapsed, and we got that job. I was on the air ambulance, and I remember it quite vividly because I had an air observer with me, and she was doing her last check-off. So this was her last ride to be checked off to get her half wing, finish her training, and do the work herself as an air observer.
Yep.
On all the helicopters. And we'd landed on the street outside of the Arthur Seat chairlift, and I remember seeing the pylons right. It actually collapsed from the base where it stopped, the stop station where the people got on and off. About 3 or 4 pylons up the hill, and I'd been on that chairlift before, years and years ago, and I thought it was terribly safe. But to see these pylons collapse, and people were still stuck in their chairs on the ground, some were out, and as you looked up the hill, as the pylons had sort of sunk and the wires had come off, there were people all the way up Arthur's Seat stuck, and the fire brigade were getting them off. But we'd landed right outside of the station where it collapsed on the road, and I remember that there wasn't enough paramedics. Right in front of us, right where we landed, there would have been at least 3 of the chairlift seats with people in them. They'd all hit the ground. I don't know how far they would have fallen. The one furthest away from the station would have been at least 20 metres, I'd say. Yep. Maybe. All had really bad back injuries and weren't moving, and there was one ambulance on the road. I'd got out of the helicopter with my paramedic, Steve Groves, his name was. I'll never forget Steve. And we started treating the worst. So Steve had gone to the paramedics there and said, "What's the worst patient?" So we started treating this one, and they went and found someone else. And the observer was with me, Rachel, her name was, Rachel O'Brien. I probably shouldn't say that, she weren't like that. She started to help. And then there was another patient a little further over that was also critical. And Steve had asked me to go and treat her. So I took Rachel and went and treated her with the fires. And the helicopter was only really made for one patient, and there would have been enough for 3 helicopters there. And Steve had said to me, "Can we take your patient and mine?" turns out we could if we kicked off Rachel, which we did. So she stayed there and had to get a lift back to the station while we took the patients. And that was really the first time that a paramedic had given me a patient to treat myself.
Yep.
That was the first for me, because usually we'd all only take the one patient, being the worst one, and we'd help them treat the patient, but this is my patient. So we've got them both to the helicopter. We had to put in a temporary stretcher and strap her to the side. The other patient was in a normal stretcher. I remember equipment being everywhere because we were with two patients. There's fluids going haywire, there's bandages going haywire, there's neck braces everywhere, there's empty packets of drug syringes everywhere. And it was about a 19-minute trip back to the hospital, and all of a sudden, you know, when we usually get to hospitals, the paramedic we drag the patient in to the cubicle, the emergency cubicle, and the paramedic does what's called a handover. Talks to the staff about the injury and what's been treated, the suspected injuries, what they've had, the observations on the way, and heart rate, blood pressure, and pulse oximeter, and all that sort of stuff. Does an official handover, then walks out. I remember getting met at the helipad, and Steve had walked off with his patient and the nurse and the orderly, and then another crew come out and got my patient with the nurse. And lucky I knew the nurse, Jude her name was, lovely, been there for like forever. And I think she knew that I was out of my comfort zone. I remember walking in there and the doctor turned around and wanted the handover. And I was going, holy fuck. And I don't know what happened. I blabbed this stuff out because I'd heard it so many times, just blabbed it. And I remember resting afterwards. I don't want to do another job like that. And Jude come up to me and said, "Oh, you did a really good job, Cameron." So thank God for that. But the following, I remember sitting on the pad thinking, let's not do another job like that for a while. Just sort of started up to go back to Essendon. I heard that Rachel had got a car, a police car, to take her back to Essendon Airport, which is probably about an hour and a half's drive for her, poor thing. We got a job. It was a car prang at Rosebud, which is about 2 k's south of where the Arthur Stewart chairlift was. So we'd flown back past the chairlift and landed his head-on accident, and I was back on again. Again, another hairy job, but that sort of makes the shift go quick.
Yeah.
But that particular shift I remember because it was my first, patient I own. And it was good that Steve Grove, the paramedic, trusted me to do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
That was a bonus for me.
Yep.
Made me feel a lot better about my skills, because the skills that I learnt for the previous 10 years prior to that, actually I got to use. But boy, a nerve-wracking time. Absolutely nerve-wracking time.
Well, there's... Throughout, when I'm reading your book, there's so many times of where you join the air rescue and air observer, and there's one job that affects you, and we'll get to that a little bit later, the Bass Strait job.
Yep.
And I've read up on it where it's like the lead up, the surf is like the water, like the conditions are absolutely terrible. You winch down, you get on the boat, and I'm going to let you take it from here, and you virtually, I can't believe what I was, and I'll let you tell this one, Cam, because the
guy Ron Palmer was a 70-year-old back then, 73 I think. He was an ex-sea captain on supertankers, and in his retirement built himself a yacht and sailed all around parts of Canada. He was a POM but lived in Canada, and decided he wanted to do a round the world trip. He'd got to New Zealand, and as he went from New Zealand to Melbourne direct, it was his plane, because he had his sister in Melbourne. And halfway across the Tasman, his engine stopped, and his wind generator with power, something happened to that, it stopped. Now, he could have turned back, but he thought, I could just finish the job under sail. And that's no problem, because he was right in the middle, he had the choice. When he got to Bass Strait, south of sail, I suppose. So it would have been maybe in between, almost towards Flinders Island. He got hit by a squall that come through. And what happened was he lost his mast. He got flipped at least once or twice. He gashed his arm, really bad injury on his arm. But he thought he wasn't going to survive much longer, so he called on the radio and got the water police. And they dispatched us. And this was the following morning after he got tossed. The storm was still there. In fact, we were in the middle of it, like the eye of it at the time. So we got the job to go and get him off the yacht, and the job was to get him off the yacht and scuttle the yacht, because they couldn't have it floating around a Bass Strait, otherwise a tanker would hit it in the middle of the night. That would be disastrous. So I was the winch crewman on that shift. And the thing is, when you got two winch crewmen, you got two observers are fully trained, you almost toss a coin to see who's going to be the winch crewman and who's going to be the operator. And from memory, I think I took the winch crewman job because of the wetsuit in the kit was my size. So it stands to reason that I should be the winch crewman because it's my size. So, and you never really say, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I mean, it never matters until you get a big job. And unfortunately, this is a big job. So I remember leaving the coast at roughly Locksport, I suppose. I remember leaving the coast and going over the water and noticing the water is this milky colour, so the sand had been churned up from the bottom. And there's lots of white caps everywhere, and those wind vanes that come off the top of the white caps and the streaks on the water.
Yeah.
So I knew it was rough, but I knew it was rough anyway because you could see the clouds and the shitstorm that was around us. It was 65 miles south of Sale, so it was a fair trip out there. Remember the pilot getting to the exact location and saying, I can't see him. It was all hands on deck. The winch operator was in the front left seat still. I was in my gear ready to go down the line. I was looking at the back right and the window, and the pilot was looking at the front right double window. And we couldn't see because these white caps are everywhere and you're looking for a white yacht with huge waves with huge white caps. So looking for a white hull is the same. You just see them everywhere. Remember the pilot saying, look, I'm going to fly around to an orbit, I'm going to come back to exactly the same spot again. One, it freshens your eyes up.
Yep.
Gives you a new perspective because you're still looking as you're doing an orbit. He pulled up right in front, says, I still can't see him. Suddenly he says, oh, I've got him. And moves forward and then puts it on the left side for the winch operator to see. And I remember going the other side going, I still can't see it. Oh, there it is there, yeah. So the yacht is just getting thrown around. It's going up, down over these waves. And the mast, you could see the mast in the water and all the crap that come along with it. So all the wires are strewn over the decking and the sails you can see just below the surface. And the guy standing there just near the entrance under the hull, they got the wooden door that goes down. He's just standing there. I thought that's good because we got a message. We wanted a message to him to say, look, the second you hear the helicopter, we wanted him to go down to what's called the seacock valves, which are these big valves, 2 valves. And they pop them and it starts leaking water in the boat will sink. We want you to go and pull them when you see us and then get your ass back onto the yacht. And we're going to get you and come straight off. And we know in half an hour the boat's going to sink. That message we got told got delivered. I remember getting winch to the door, so we did all our checks. The winch operator opens the door and winches me the door, and I remember the noise was just huge. So you still got the rotor blade noise, the engine noise, and the wind noise, but you got this the waves were making noise. And I remember looking at the yacht, thinking, "There's no way they're getting me on the yacht." But I said to the winch operator, who was a very capable winch operator, I said, "Try and get me on the yacht once. If you can't get me on the yacht, put me in the water beside it. I'm not disconnecting from the wire, so I'll call him in, get him to jump in." I don't know how Brendan did it. I've got no idea, but when I landed on my feet, I was standing half a metre in front of this bloke on the deck.
Yeah, right.
And the yacht's still going up waves, and as it climbs up the waves, like you had to hold on because then it peaks over and then rolls down the next side. And I was just about to put this strop on him, and he put his hands up and said something. I couldn't hear because of the roar. He turned around and went back into the hull. And from that moment then I thought, fuck, he hasn't got the message. And he's going to bust the valves. And we've got a couple of seconds. And I remember turning to look at the helicopter, which was, what they did is lowered me on, winched out a lot of slack and then pulled back.
Yep.
Still into wind, so
Yep.
the pilot could see the boat. And, you know, you can see the wire coming from the winch. It's got a slight bend on it. Goes into the water a bit.
Yep.
Comes out of the water onto the deck of the yacht, and there's a coil laying next to me. And then that's connected to me, the hook. And then I see the helicopter start flying forward over the top of me to my right, over my right shoulder. And I thought the pilot's lost sight of the boat, or something's happened. And what happened was just the movement of the waves. He'd lost sight and was slowly crawling forward and didn't know it, because out in the middle of nowhere, it's not like you've got a tree sitting there where you can operate that. I saw the cable starting to go, and as it's going, the coil is starting to run off and getting shorter and shorter, and had gone around the wind vane. So I grabbed the cable and flicked it around the wind vane just as it almost gone tight.
Yep.
And because the helicopter was over my right shoulder, I turned towards it, had seen there's no more coil, and the cable was just about to snap, which means I was going overboard. So I took a step towards the rail,
Yeah.
and as I took that step, went tight, and I went shot off the yacht, slammed into the side of a wave about 20, 30 feet away, and sunk because of all that. When you think you've got 30, 40 metres of cable out, it's suddenly now underwater. That
Yeah.
weighs a couple of kilos.
Yep.
Most of the gear we wear doesn't float. There's a slight bit of air in it. So I'd sunk like a rock, and I was getting thrown around. And when I hit the wave, I sort of put my arm across my chest, sort of winded myself. So I had no air in my lungs, and you think, well, I don't know which
I'm
way
going to
is
drown.
up, but
Yeah, I'm going to
the
drown.
second,
Yeah.
the second, my next breath is going to be full, and you hold on, your brain's saying you need to breathe, which is probably the scariest thing I've ever experienced, is thinking, I've got to breathe in each second, it's going to be a mouthful of salt water, and then all of a sudden, I was yanked out. So what had happened was, they just winched in the wire like they were pulling in a fish.
Yep.
My understanding is that because I got thrown off the yacht, I got dragged underneath the helicopter and across the other side, so the crewman and the winch operator the pilot and winch operator couldn't see me.
Yep.
So these winch crewmen just started winching in wire, and what should happen is eventually he should winch it up and I should be on the hook.
Yep.
Like pulling in a massive fish, and
Yeah,
I was.
yeah,
So he just yanked me out of the water. By this time, the sailor had come out of the yacht and thought, oh, where's the bloke gone? I thought, you idiot. Anyway, Brendan tried one more time to get me on.
Yep.
That was useless. So according to the plan, try once, put me in the water. I winched back into the water just near the tail end of the boat. It was coming in and out of, as it's rising and crashing down. I put my hand against it to stop it hitting me, and I called the old sailor in, and he didn't want to get in the water. And I thought, man, this is your trip home. I'm not getting. This is the way it's going to be.
Yep.
I mean, getting so slow, and I'm thinking, we've got so much fuel on board. Any minute they're going to yank me out and we're going home, or I've got to punch off, set a life raft, and we're going to sit in it for a couple of hours. They're the two options. He finally lowered himself into the water, and I put the harness on him, like the strap. It's a chest piece, a chest strap. It came in a few years before that.
They're not very comfortable.
No, they're terrible. They're shocking. But
Yeah, they're terrible.
we have good ones made by a good guy, but he had chest straps. So you put that over under their arms, like a horse collar, and you connect this chest strap and tighten it so they can't slip out. But I hadn't got that on yet.
Yep.
We got smashed by this wave. And we both went under, and next thing I know, we're both at the water. And what obviously happened is the wave had come through that smashed us.
Yep.
The pilot started winching in a bit, or the movement of the helicopter. And when the wave went, we were out of the water, and we're off 10 feet above. I couldn't understand it, because if he's in the harness properly, his head should be around about where my chest is.
Yep.
But he was sitting up high, and what had happened was the chest strap wasn't on yet. It slipped under his ass, and he was sitting on it like a swing.
Oh, yeah, yep.
And he was holding onto the wire with the swing, and it's it's greasy. It's oily and greasy.
Yeah.
And he slipped and went backwards, and I grabbed his leg, and I held onto the leg. And one of the things we have to do as a winch crewman is when that happens and you want to get put it back in the water or get winched up, you've got to give him a hand signal. Pretty hard to give you a hand signal when you're holding on this bloke's legs. We're about 20, 30 feet by that stage, and he's just flapping around upside down, and the leg had wedged under my shoulder. So, and the harness wasn't doing anything. He was sitting on it.
Yeah.
It's like falling out of the swing.
Yep.
If you're going to fall off a swing, you're going to fall off. The winch chopper eventually worked out that something was going on, so put me back in the water. We got back in the water, smashed by more waves. Eventually got the chest strap, and like I said, I really enjoy that last winch up to the top.
Yep.
But I remember getting to the top thinking, fuck, I'm exhausted. Absolutely exhausted. We got dragged into the helicopter. There was water and shit everywhere. I remember going back thinking, this is bullshit. I'm taking the next job offer that I get,
Yep.
The whole winch rescue went for about maybe 5 minutes, but it felt like about 50.
Yeah.
I had I got the chance to have a shower at rescue base in the Latrobe Valley, and I had a gash like I'd been in a motorcycle accident right up my left hand side, up through the left ribs. Because what happened when they finally winched me out the water, the cable, which usually keep an eye on the cable, in the water you got to know where it is.
Yep.
I had no idea. We're just getting smashed by waves. It actually gone below me and behind my back, and then up my left hand side. So when they winched me up, it had to pull me out and twist me around first.
Yep.
And that's when it just grazed right up the side. I didn't know until the hot water of the shower hit it, and I looked and I just thought, holy hell, it's like...
this is... Yeah.
And I was sore for weeks.
And I guess for you, there's training can only go so far, and you can only train for certain things. Was that, and it obviously developed for you when we know with your book later on that that's your a lot of PT. That's part of.
I think that with PTSD, I'm sure we'll get into that later. I think that was the start of the downhill turn.
Yeah.
I don't believe it was the cause of it.
Yep.
Major contributor, yes, but it was definitely the start of the downhill turn to major PTSD and what I ended up with. Yeah.
And for you, in that moment of, like in that rescue, did you ever feel this is it? I'm gone.
When I was underwater, I thought it was gone.
Yep.
No doubt, I thought it was gone.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then, but then obviously coming out, training, kick back in again, and
yeah, like you see, you can't train for those circumstances because it's just downright dangerous. But you can certainly train with repetitive training and know your equipment. So I knew my equipment back to front.
Yeah.
Although I could put from when the last time we went back in the water when he was upside down.
Yeah.
And when we got finally winched out, I cannot remember putting the harness on him back. Now, I would have had to settle him in the water.
Yeah.
We would have been going up and down the water as the waves come over the top of us. So we've been holding versus going under water. And I would have had to have taken the harness under his legs and then put it back over his head, get his arms down, then put the chest strap and tighten it, then give the winch crewman a thumb to say, get us out of the water. And I can't remember doing any of that. But I could do that with my eyes shut. So obviously whatever happened at that stage and this is what does happen under stress, sometimes your brain will switch off.
Yeah.
And your memory bank will say, no, I'm going to remember this because this is traumatic. So I'm going to save this guy the problem and later I'm going to switch off. So I had switched off, but obviously I'd done all those things. And the only thing that gets you to do that is repetition training.
Muscle memory.
I put that harness on people, whether it be real or training, hundreds of times.
And it's something that I know too, and in my training as a firey, that I used to say it all the time, Cam, like, every Wednesday night, it'd be bowl and roll hoses, bowl and roll hoses. And I did that religiously, and it got to a point where I'd be like, why am I doing this? Like, why the hell are we doing it every week? But then when you get out in the real situation, it's just second nature, just boom, go. And it's just muscle memory and you watch, and I love it. You're watching you guys come through, and it's the same thing. They bowl, and it goes and drops. As, like, you can just, after a period of time, you just know how it's going to, and you just aim it at something, and it just goes dead. Sometimes it'll go...
Well, yeah, it's the old fear of flight, fear of flight. If you get under that much pressure or fear, and some people just freeze.
Yeah.
I think if you do something so many times, repetition, that your body will still do that. You might not remember it, which is exactly what happened to me.
Yep.
Now, I suppose if I hadn't done it that much and I was just brand new, I probably would have struggled getting that strop on.
Yep.
But I'd totally blanked out.
To just going into the... And
Totally blanked out. Cannot remember it to this day.
And I suppose for that guy too, and you, as you say, he was very reluctant to get into the water. I mean, he's probably thinking, I'm going to die, like I'm not going to live here, like. And I guess for him, you calming him was probably and like, did you stay in touch with him after that, or did you?
He wrote a book. He wrote 2 books where he mentioned it. I did. He came out. He didn't stay in Australia very long. Poor bugger got interviewed by someone at the ABC, and they suggested that he was dangerous by going sailing in that weather anyway, which wasn't his fault. He didn't know it was coming. There wasn't any weather report that I knew of.
Yeah.
Although it might have been earlier, but wasn't supposed to last that long. But he obviously didn't have it. Suggested that he should pay for the rescue. He jumped on a plane very quickly, thinking that was what would normally happen, but the rules are that stuff's free.
Yeah.
The same as if an Australian sailor got caught offshore of Canada or the US, the Coast Guard go, they don't send you a bill. So we're all responsible for our own areas, and that's not what we do.
Yeah. Yep.
So he eventually came back and to visit his sister, and I got a call, and we went to lunch. We'd actually told him what happened, because he said, "What happened to you?" I said, "Well, you're not going to believe this." He said, he apologised. He just said, but I felt sorry for the guy. He was retired, so he didn't have a lot of money. He built this yacht, and it's now sitting at the bottom of Bass Strait.
Yeah, right.
It's the only thing he owned in the whole world. He's 72. He rented the place he was living in, but he owned this yacht, and now it's... And you try and tell an insurance company you want to sail around the world, he wasn't insured. No one will insure him, so he'd lost his pride and joy. Felt sorry for him.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean... Especially
when interviewed by this lady in the ABC saying, you should pay for it, you're reckless, and oh God.
Yeah, one of the worst things you can say, and I sometimes, Cam, I think sometimes, and this probably upset journalists, but sometimes they don't do the work, they don't do the background check, and they're quick to ask the easy questions.
Well, they want the controversy too.
And I don't think you can, like, for such a traumatic event, treat it with a bit more respect to the man. Like,
yeah, look, I don't know how he went with it either. But, who knows? I mean, I haven't been in contact. I don't know how he is now. He might not be alive anymore.
Yeah.
I dare say he isn't. But you don't know how it affected him.
No, that's right. Exactly.
I mean, he did not want to get in that water. He was scared shitless. I get that.
Yeah, understandably.
And I can only imagine how he felt when he was upside down hanging by his legs.
Yeah. Especially with big waves coming at,
and he's looking at him upside down, and then back in the water to get fixed up and getting pounded.
Yeah.
He was wearing a survival suit, but none of it was. That was flotation. There was no flotation there.
Yeah.
So you're going in and out of the water, gasping for breath every time you get up, and then you get sucked down again, while some bloke's putting harnesses on you.
Yeah.
Must have been absolutely frightening.
Oh.
And the guy's 72.
He's not a young, you
Should
know.
be at home with his slippers on, watching in front of the fire, watching the TV.
Yeah, not sailing around the world doing that, you know.
Yeah.
And there's a few like Bass Strait, that job, and then there's another job where you. So part of your air observing was marijuana crops, and yeah, there's a job that you talk about that it got my straight away. I went, oh, Cam's in. You know, this is going into some rugged country here, and a certain farm that you were.
Oh yeah. That
this,
was, you know, you talk about. We used to send a helicopter, single engine helicopter, up to country areas, every summer, the height of the growing season, and try and find these crops where people are planting them in the middle of nowhere. And some of them are huge. You think about that now, you think they don't even bother. But the main drug of choice back in early 90s and mid 90s was marijuana. So every year we'd go and find it. And the local we'd get together with the local coppers and we'd do 4 or 5 days in the area, and they'd say the parts of bush that they think the locals are growing their crops in. And there's a bit of a competition. We always wanted to find the bigger one or be the first to find it, and some guys are better than others. And we were floating around near Rainbow, which is near Nil, in the little desert, just south of the little desert. And we come across this property. There was a list of properties we had to look at, and this was, I think it was one of the last ones before we got a fuel. We had a fuel truck follow us around, and a police backup crew. There was myself and one pilot, and we talked about young policemen in cars, 22 and 20.
yeah.
I remember sitting in that helicopter during drug season, this $1 million helicopter, in charge of it, flying with a pilot, and we're both the same age, 24.
Jeez.
So we got to this property. You see it on the horizon. It's covered in wheat fields. There's yellow, you know, the dead wheat, yellow, and had a short driveway to the house, long garage with equipment in it, and the typical farmhouse with trees around it. But it had this treed area that was fenced off, and it would have been 3 or 4 house block sizes. And this, like I can identify a marijuana crop from the air, but these were big green pine trees we looked at, and we thought from a distance, we're about a K away, and we thought, geez, why are people growing these lines of pine trees in this bloody place up ahead? And as we got closer, we thought, pine trees, it's marijuana crop. So he'd had this bush area at the back of his house, cleaned out in the middle of it, and was growing these plants that were 13, 14 foot tall. They were huge.
Far out.
And then they had stumps on them that you couldn't get your hand around. Then as we flew around, there's a row, like a fence of all this dried stuff. And there was just as many plants dried. Ended up being about 3,500 plants. I remember seeing a white 4-drive, like a Range Rover type, in one of the sheds. We called for our backup. Our backup was miles off. The fuel truck was miles off, and our fuel gauge is just, you can imagine it just sitting on almost zero. Now, legally, you can't land. You've got to land with a certain amount of reserve fuel. So we tossed up, either we fly to the fuel truck, either we sit here, run out of juice, and get absolutely shit canned by Civil Aviation Safety Authority for flying until we're empty, or we land at the place, or we go and get fuel. And we thought, if we land at the place, we can at least see if someone's there and lock them up. Problem is, I'm the one that's armed, the pilot's not. So we land, shut down the helicopter right in the front yard. First we went really low around it, actually. We got so close we were blowing the gutters off the house. Because we wanted to say, if anyone's in there, they're going to come out. Yep. So we did a really low orbit, 4 or 5 minutes off the ground around the house. The windows would have been shaking. If anyone was in there, they would have shut their pants and come out. And they didn't, so then we landed. And the pilot went around the back, runs to the pilot to go out the back, didn't have a firearm, but he was there to wait to see if anyone ran out, and I went through the front door. So I got my firearm out and tried to sneak through the front door, and of course old country homes have crickety floors, so I made that much noise. It wasn't funny, but I remember going to the kitchen, checking the rooms, then going to the kitchen, and the dishes had food in them that was still moist, and I thought, someone's been here really recently, or they're here. So we checked the house, and there was nothing there. So I went back out, said to the pilot, let's go into the shed, and the car was gone. So while we were landing, he'd gone out the back door, got in the car and taken off. So we had about 20 minutes of fuel left. We jumped in the helicopter and covered as much area, got as high as we could, and we saw every road for 10 k's in every direction, went up and down and orbits everywhere, even in the little desert, and couldn't find this car at all. It vanished. And I thought, we just let the grower of the biggest crop in Victoria ever found walk out the front door and escape, and it was just demoralising. And you can imagine the amount of shit we copped back at the office. Was horrendous. And it turns out what he did is drove to the nearest farm that was his mates and put his car in and waited till we all went.
Did they ever catch him again?
They caught him, I think about 12 months later. He was in Italy and had about, I'm not sure, it was 75,000 or 175,000 in his bank account, which was his fee to mind the crop. So he's only a minder, it wasn't a grower. He was solely there to keep an eye on it.
Yeah, right.
For the Italians.
Just because I got to that point in the book and I was like, you go on the ride with you. You're like, oh, here we go.
I still remember thinking, oh God, I mean, it was great to find the crop.
Yeah.
But it would have been so much better to catch the bloke that was looking after.
Yeah, absolutely.
But they eventually did, and the detectives worked all out. They said it was a Italian mafia type crop, and he had the money. He was on a plane a couple of days later and didn't want to come back. I think they did bring him back, extradited back to Melbourne.
Yeah, right.
I don't know, but later on the local coppers, it was 2 semi-trailers loads of marijuana. They took it down the local tip and burnt it. They didn't even invite me to the party.
Would have been one almighty
would have
high.
been a very good party to be down here.
Yeah, I was going to say it would have been one almighty high. That's for
Yeah.
sure. So, we mentioned like you. So you get to your point of you've been in air. So you've been in the air wing for 13 years.
Yep, 13 it was total. Yeah.
When did you know it was time to move on? And were there signs that you knew that it was time?
I just lost my love of flying. I'd prefer to. It got to the point where I'd prefer to sit there at the office and do nothing rather than just jump in a helicopter to fly around Melbourne. Which is really, if you say that to people, they think, "Are you crazy?"
No, I get it.
But I
understand it.
I just lost interest in it. If someone said, "Cameron, you got a job," I go, "Oh no, not another job. I've got to go and fly," or another ambulance job, another car accident, or something like that. I just got sick of the flying. So a mate of mine convinced me to put into the feds for the federal police, and he said you might get a chance to go overseas. They rang me a couple of times over the years and offered me jobs in Canberra or Melbourne, and eventually they offered me one where it was 2 years overseas, either in either the UN jobs or Solomons or Timor. And Dad did that. Dad went to the Malaya emergency, and I always thought if I ever get my chance to do something like that,
yep,
I'm doing that.
You're doing it, yeah.
So I took the job.
Was that, and I just want to backtrack for just a sec, was that hard for you to resign from 20 years at that stage with Victoria Police and going into the unknown, or was it exciting?
I think it was surprisingly easy, only because I lost the love of the job and the flying anyway.
Yep.
If you spend 13 years at the police air wing, to get out, you're going to go back to uniform policing. You're not going to get the prime job. You hadn't been in the mainstream policing for 13 years. So if I wanted to be promoted to a sergeant, I'd have to go back out the street, work the divisional van for a couple of years, then try and get promoted. And that didn't appeal to me whatsoever.
Yeah, and you weren't, detective wasn't really the option either. So.
No, because again, I'd have to go back out in the street and get some good figures and apply to become a detective. So that, I'd always said if I was going to leave the air wing, I was going to leave the air wing for a good job. Yeah. And like I said, the feds rang me up and said we got jobs in Canberra uniform. Well, I wasn't going to leave the air wing to go back to uniform. So, but when they said overseas service for 2 years, it was very easy to sign on the dotted line then. I think I was out within a couple of weeks. I had 2 weeks off, and then I was in Canberra.
So explain to us, Cam, because federal police is a little bit different to state police. What was obviously you accepted the job, but did you have to learn a whole different set of legislations and being federal and to state legislation and all the difference?
Well,
That was part 1 of our 2-part episode with former Victorian and AFP police officer Cameron Hardiman. Join us next week for part 2.